Every summer, without fail, I found myself packed up and shipped off to my grandmother's in a small, remote town outside of Tampa. My parents were always swamped with work, leaving me with no choice but to spend a few months with her. I didn't mind it, though. In fact, I grew to look forward to it. There were old friends to catch up with, the familiar smell of her cooking, and the strange comfort of being in a house that held more memories than I could count. The drive down there was always the same: endless stretches of highway, trees lining both sides, and nothing but wilderness surrounding us. It felt like the world had forgotten this place even existed. Sometimes I'd let my imagination run wild, picturing a little man leaping from tree to tree as we drove by. But it wasn't the wilderness that would haunt me this summer. It was what was hidden inside my grandmother's house. I arrived early on a Friday morning. The rain hadn't let up, and I could hear the steady patter against the windows as I stepped inside. My grandmother was busy in the kitchen, preparing her famous blood sausage and gravy over flaky biscuits, a dish most people would find repulsive. But for some strange reason, it was my absolute favorite. It had become a tradition over the years. As we ate, she asked about the past school year. Being a senior, it was the last time we'd have this conversation. After the meal, we cleaned up together. She insisted on doing most of the work, despite her frail state. "If you don't use it, you lose it," she'd say, her voice thick with stubbornness. I took on the bigger tasks, like dusting and sorting dishes in the top cupboards. The house itself was old, like the smell of aged wood, stale air, and dirty curtains hung like memories from the past. Yet there was a warmth here, a comfort, a piece of my childhood that never quite left. After finishing the dusting, I moved over to the fireplace. On top, there was a collection of photos. Most of them were of my grandparents. My grandfather had passed away a few years back, just after my freshman year. It still felt recent. My grandmother kept his memory alive by telling stories. I think it helped her cope with the loneliness. As I was dusting the mantel, I knocked over a picture frame. "Shoot," I muttered under my breath, crouching to pick it up. As I turned the frame over, I noticed something odd. It felt like there was something behind the photo. A lump. Curious, I slid the photograph out of its frame and found an old, faded picture of the basement. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that door. It was unlike any other door in the house, barely hanging on its hinges. It had always been closed, never opened. Just then, I heard my grandmother's voice from the other room, stern but not angry. "Don't go breaking things, son," she said, taking the photo from my hands. "Clear out that glass and get a move on." I didn't question her. I finished cleaning and spent the rest of the evening in my room, alone. It was storming outside, the wind howling, the sound of thunder cracking the silence. I put on my headphones and tried to drown out the eerie weather with music. But then, thump. I pulled the headphones off, looking at the clock. 3 a.m. What could that noise be? I stood up and walked down the hallway toward the source of the sound. My grandmother's room was on the first floor. I passed it quietly, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The basement door. It was cracked open. I had never seen that door open before. A feeling of compulsion hit me. I had to see what was beyond it. With hesitant steps, I made my way over, the door creaking as I pushed it open. The stairs were old but surprisingly intact. I descended into the basement, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I pulled the light string above me. The basement was far less ominous than I expected. Neatly organized, almost clinical. No clutter, no mess. The air was thick, yet the space felt unnervingly normal. But in the far corner, covered by a dirty sheet, was something that didn't belong: a mirror. It was unlike any mirror I'd ever seen. Old, yet flawless. The frame was detailed, aged but beautiful. I couldn't resist the pull to get closer. I stood before it, staring into my reflection. I made faces, smiled at myself, until I realized how ridiculous I must look, standing alone in the basement at 3 a.m, making silly faces at a mirror. But before I turned away, something caught my eye. My reflection wasn't quite right. It mirrored me exactly, every movement, every expression. But there was something off. The eyes, they were hollow, cold, lifeless. Even when I smiled, the reflection remained utterly emotionless. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I tried to shake off the experience. I brushed my teeth, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, but I couldn't help but notice the emptiness in my own eyes. A hollow stare. I tried to shake it off. I met up with an old friend at the mall. The day was pleasant, and for a while, I forgot about the mirror. But when I walked into the bathroom to wash my hands, there it was again, the reflection. It was staring back at me, but this time, it felt different. It was as though the reflection wasn't me at all. It was cold, void of life. The more I stared, the more I could see the emptiness behind my own eyes. I returned home, unsettled, but nothing could prepare me for what came next. The house was still, too still. My grandmother's car was in the driveway, but the porch light was off. As I entered, I felt the dread building in my chest. There was something wrong about this place tonight. I turned on the TV in the den, but when I glanced at the reflection in the dark screen, I froze. My reflection didn't move with me. My arms stayed frozen in midair, the reflection mocking my every movement. I couldn't breathe. I shut my eyes, rubbed them, and when I opened them, everything was perfectly fine. But I knew what I had seen. I heard the thumping again, louder this time, more deliberate. Thump, thump. Then came the unmistakable sound of the basement door creaking open. It was as if the house itself was breathing in the silence. Panic gripped me as I ran toward the front door, but it was locked. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I turned slowly, the cold weight of fear settling in my gut. The basement door was wide open now, and something was standing in the doorway. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. A cold, icy presence washed over me. The lights flickered. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my cheek. I gasped. I woke up in my room, disoriented. My heart was racing. The clock on the wall said only 25 minutes had passed since I left my friend at the mall. I looked at my grandmother, sitting in her chair, knitting as if nothing had happened. "You okay, son?" she asked with a concerned look. "Yeah, I thought I saw something," I replied, my voice trembling. Her smile was soft, yet her eyes, I don't know how to explain it. There was something unsettling about them. I made my way to the photo I'd found earlier, the one from the basement. I unwrapped it to take a closer look. On the back, in faded handwriting, it read, "David and Gretna, R.I.P." My breath caught in my throat. I looked up, my stomach twisting into knots. There she was, my grandmother, standing in the doorway with a smile that wasn't quite right, and behind her, the mirror.